What if the one thing you have been searching for your entire life is the very thing you have been unwilling to trust? Not because it is hidden, but because it is too close, too intimate, too immediate, too much like you. Most people can easily agree with the words, "With God all things are possible." They hear that and feel no resistance. It sounds noble. It sounds comforting. It sounds like truth. And yet the moment those words are accepted, a quiet separation usually follows. God is there. Man is here. Power belongs to heaven. Need belongs to earth. And from that division, the whole struggle begins. Because the real problem was never whether God is powerful. The real problem is that you stopped at power and did not go on to identity. You accepted that God can do all things, but not that God became you. You accepted divine ability, but not divine indwelling. You accepted possibility, but kept it outside yourself. And that is why so many live in admiration of truth while remaining unchanged by it. Because truth does not change you when you only agree with it. It changes you when you become it. The purpose of this understanding is not merely to inspire you. It is to dissolve the distance between the source and the self. It is to reveal that the creative power of God does not dwell in some remote place. Nor did it choose one single man and leave the rest abandoned. It dwells in us, within us, as us, through the very center of being. And when that is understood, everything changes. Because now imagination is no longer fantasy. It is the indwelling Christ. Not a vague force, not a poetic idea, but the actual creative power through which all things are made visible. This is why the statement becomes so radical. Man is all imagination, and God is man, and exists in us, and we in him. Not symbolically only, actually. The eternal body of man is the imagination. And when you say, "I am," you are touching the root of that mystery without even realizing it. That is the hidden center of all transformation. Because the question is no longer, can God do this? The question becomes, can I believe that the power I call God is the very power by which I now imagine? That is where the test begins. Can you believe that the one who says, "I am," can enter a state and give it life? Can you believe that an imaginal act, if felt as real, is not less than reality but the beginning of it? Can you believe that what you inwardly occupy outwardly resurrects? Because this is the law. Not wishing, not hoping, occupying. You do not create by admiring the fulfilled state. You create by dwelling in it. And dwelling means this. You select a state. You enter it in imagination. You ask, what would it feel like if it were true? And then you remain there. That is resurrection. That is how the unseen becomes seen. Not by force, not by outer struggle, but by inward occupation. If the spectator could enter into any state in imagination and dwell there, that state would become objective. Why? Because Christ in man is the resurrecting power of the universe. And if Christ is your own wonderful human imagination, then every state you persist in becomes flesh. That is why the real issue is never desire. The issue is identity, not what you want, what you are willing to be. Because wanting still leaves the thing outside you. Being collapses the distance. What are you assuming right now? Not what you say you want, not what you post, not what you tell others. What are you assuming? Because assumption is identity in seed form. If you assume you are overlooked, life will mirror exclusion. If you assume you are delayed, life will mirror waiting. If you assume you are unsupported, life will reflect instability. If you assume you are already the one you long to be, then even before the world changes, something within you settles. And that inward settlement is the beginning of outer rearrangement. This is why imagination must become personal. You do not merely imagine an event. You imagine yourself into the state. You ask, If I were already this person, how would I feel? How would my friends see me? How would they speak to me? What would be reflected in their faces? That is powerful because it takes the fulfilled state out of abstraction and lets it become relational, embodied, immediate. A friend smiles at you differently. A loved one congratulates you. Someone says you've changed. Someone rejoices because they see in you what you've already assumed yourself to be. This is not mental entertainment. This is a state becoming real. And when you believe in the reality of the imaginal act, you are no longer outside the kingdom. You are beginning to live from it, because the kingdom of heaven is not a distant place. It is a state of consciousness in which everything becomes subject to imaginative power, not after death, not in theory, now. That is why the one who knows this best can help others in a way the world hardly understands. You can give a person money, status, opportunity, comfort, and if they still do not know who they are, they return tomorrow asking for more. But if you reveal to a man the source, or at least imagine lovingly on his behalf from the state of his fulfillment, you have given him something deeper than aid. You have touched cause, and cause is always inner. This is why every seeming other is yourself pushed out. Not because individuality disappears, but because the same Christ dwells in all. The same creative power, the same resurrecting principle, the same divine imagination. So when you imagine lovingly for another, you are not interfering with some separate universe. You are working within the one life, and you do not need permission to do it. You do not need consent to hear good news for someone. You do not need approval to lift them in imagination. You do not need to ask whether they believe first. You simply assume them into a better state. You see them as whole, employed, loved, free, radiant, successful, honored. And if you remain faithful to that imaginal act, the world will find its way to express it. Not because you know how, because Christ in you knows how. This is where the outer mind becomes uneasy. It asks for method. It asks for sequence. It asks for reason and visible cause. But the law does not begin there. The law begins in the end. The founders of great things did not wait for time to produce their reality. They believed it in. They imagined ahead of evidence. They dared to occupy inwardly what had not yet appeared outwardly. And because they did, the world eventually rearranged itself around the assumption. This is why your problem is never that you cannot imagine. You already are imagining. Always. When you worry, you imagine. When you rehearse rejection, you imagine. When you revisit humiliation, you imagine. When you expect disappointment, you imagine. The question is never whether imagination is occurring. The question is whether you are using it consciously or unconsciously being used by old states. Are you reacting to reality or selecting it? Because if imagination creates reality, then not only your noble states matter, your neglected states matter. The moods you repeat matter. The horrors you feast on matter. The headlines you inwardly digest matter. If you continually feed the mind with fear, bitterness, despair, envy, humiliation, and violence, then you should not be surprised to meet their harvest. You may fail to recognize it as your own harvest, but that changes nothing. So the call is not merely to imagine something lovely once. It is to become inwardly discriminating. Choose the lovely state. Choose the end you want. Choose life. Because there are not two creators, there are not two powers fighting over your experience. There is one. And that one is your own wonderful human imagination. That is the scandal. That is the freedom. That is the test. Can you believe it enough to use it? Not for a moment, not when inspired, but tonight. Can you go to sleep not in longing, but in fulfillment? Can you decide what you want, not what others think you should want, not what seems reasonable, not what matches your current history, but what you truly want? And then ask, what would it feel like if it were already true? Catch that mood, give it the tones of reality, and sleep in it. Because the one who sleeps in the wish fulfilled is not merely resting. He is planting. He is selecting. He is resurrecting. And what he resurrects within must one day appear without. What if the greatest power in your life is the one thing you've been dividing your trust between, not because it's weak, but because you haven't chosen it completely? You say you believe, you say you trust, you say you understand, and yet quietly you still hold on to something else. A backup belief, a hidden dependency, a silent just in case. And that is enough to break the state. Because the law does not respond to partial identity. It responds to complete assumption. This is why the idea of the pearl of great price is so radical. It is not about acquiring something new. It is about giving up everything that competes with it. Not physically, internally. Every belief in an external power. Every idea that something outside you controls your life. Every subtle dependency on luck, timing, astrology, people, conditions, systems, approval, all of it must go. Not because those things don't appear real, but because you are choosing a higher truth. There is only one creative power, and it is within. You cannot hold two centers of authority. You cannot say, I believe in imagination, but I also believe this external force decides my outcome. Because the moment you divide power, you divide identity. And when identity is divided, creation becomes unstable. He who is not with me is against me. This is not a moral statement. It is a structural one. You are either aligned with your creative center or you are fragmented. And fragmentation produces inconsistent results. This is why people say it worked once but not again. Because they did not fully buy the pearl. They tasted it. They experimented with it. They used it occasionally, but they did not surrender all other beliefs. And so they returned again and again to old courses. Are you still holding on to something as a backup? That question matters more than technique, because technique cannot override division. You can imagine perfectly, but if part of you still believes this depends on timing, this depends on them, this depends on circumstances, this depends on luck, then you have already split the source, and a split source cannot produce a clear reflection. This is why the price is everything. Not effort, not discipline, belief, total belief. You give up every other power. You stop assigning authority to anything outside your own awareness. You stop giving credit to external causes. You stop explaining outcomes through anything other than state. Because the moment you do, you reclaim authorship. And authorship is where creation begins. This is also why people fear this teaching, because it removes every excuse. It removes the ability to blame. It removes the comfort of saying, it's not up to me. But in that removal, there is absolute freedom, because now it is up to you. And if it is up to you, it can change. This is where the test becomes real, not theoretical, practical. You are told, test yourself, not once, not casually. Seriously, take someone in your life, someone in need, someone struggling, someone uncertain, and without telling them, without asking them, without changing anything externally, see them differently, not as they appear, as they could be, better, whole, successful, free. And do not do it as a wish, do it as a fact. You bring them before your mind. You hear their voice. You see their expression. You feel their presence. And you hear them tell you, it's done. I'm fine now. Everything worked out. And you believe it. Not later, now. That is the test. Not words, not theory, application. Because if Christ is truly the power and wisdom of God, then it knows how. You do not need to figure out the path. You do not need to control the outcome. You do not need to manage the bridge. You only need to assume the end and remain there. This is where most people interfere. They imagine and then they start thinking, how will this happen? What if it doesn't? What if something goes wrong? What if I'm wrong? And in that moment, they leave the state. Because thinking without identity returns you to separation. The moment you start analyzing, you step out of being. And the moment you step out of being, you return to wanting. And wanting keeps it distant. Are you still trying to figure it out? Or are you willing to let it unfold? Because the bridge of incidents is not your responsibility. It is the expression of the state. Once the state is assumed, the bridge begins. Quietly, naturally, unfolding through people, events, timing, opportunities, even disruptions. And from the outside, it looks like coincidence. But from within, it is inevitability. This is why you were told, do not be a hearer only, be a doer. And doing here does not mean physical action. It means imaginal action. It means you actually enter the state. You actually feel it. You actually dwell in it. Because if you only hear, you deceive yourself. You think you understand, but nothing changes. And the lack of change reveals the truth. You did not apply. You did not assume. You did not remain. This is why faith must become alive. Not belief as an idea, belief as identity. Because a living faith acts not outwardly first, inwardly. It occupies the state. And from that occupation, everything else flows. This is also why the story matters. A simple imaginal act. A woman sees another as well. She does not ask permission. She does not tell her. She does not intervene physically. She simply imagines and believes. And a week later, reality rearranges. Debts cleared. Money appears. Health returns. Radiance emerges. And the one who received the change does not even know the cause. Because the cause was invisible. And invisible causes are always misunderstood by the world. They point to events. You know, it was state. This is why imagination must be used lovingly. Because it works. Whether you know it or not. Whether you intend it or not. So the question is not, does it work? The question is, how am I using it? Because every moment you are imagining. Every moment you are selecting. Every moment you are creating. If it were already true, would you still be thinking this way? That question reveals everything. Because the version of you who already has it does not analyze, does not doubt, does not divide. He simply is. And from that being, life rearranges. So now the path is clear. Not easy, but clear. You let go of every other power. You choose one. You assume. You remain. And you allow the unseen to become seen. There is something deeper than desire. Something more subtle than belief. Something that quietly determines everything you experience. And it is this, what you are loyal to within yourself. Not what you say you want. Not what you try to think. Not what you hope will happen. But what you keep returning to again and again when no one is watching. Because that is your true state. And your state is your life. Most people don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because they are still emotionally loyal to an old identity. They say they want change, but they still feel like the old version of themselves. They imagine success, but still feel like someone who is behind. They picture love, but still carry the feeling of rejection. They visualize abundance, but still identify with lack. And so, nothing stabilizes. Because imagination does not respond to what you visit occasionally. It responds to what you live in. This is why persistence is not about repeating an image. It is about remaining faithful to a new identity. Even when there is no evidence. Even when your senses deny it. even when your past tries to remind you who you used to be. Because the past has no power, except the power you continue to give it through memory. And memory is just imagination facing backward. So the real shift happens here. You stop referring to the past as authority. You stop asking what has been true, and you begin asking what is true now in my assumption. Because assumption, if sustained, becomes fact, not because of effort, but because of identity. You are not forcing reality to change. You are changing the one who experiences it. And when the experiencer changes, the experience must follow. This is why the phrase matters. Thinking from the end. Not thinking of the end from it. There is a difference. Thinking of the end keeps it separate. Thinking from the end makes it present. If you are thinking of being successful, you are still someone who is not. If you are thinking of being loved, you are still someone who is waiting. If you are thinking of being free, you are still someone who is trying. But if you think from it, everything changes. Because now you react differently. You feel differently. You interpret differently. You expect differently. And expectation is the silent architect of reality. What are you expecting right now? Not consciously, naturally. What feels normal to you? Because whatever feels natural is what you are identified with. And whatever you are identified with, you will continue to experience. So the goal is not to force belief. It is to make the new state feel natural. How? By entering it repeatedly until it feels like you. You don't try to convince yourself. You don't argue with doubt. You simply return again and again to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. You sleep in it, you rest in it, you think from it, and slowly it stops feeling like imagination and starts feeling like reality. That is the shift. And once it feels real, it begins to objectify. Because the outer world is always reflecting inner naturalness. Not effort, not struggle, naturalness. This is why some people imagine once and it happens. And others imagine for months and nothing moves. It's not the technique, it's the state of conviction. One feels it as real, the other is still trying. One has accepted it, the other is negotiating. One is being it, the other is visiting it. And life responds accordingly. So ask yourself honestly, am I visiting this state or am I living in it? Because visiting produces glimpses. Living produces transformation. This is also why doubt is not your enemy. Doubt is simply a sign that you have not yet fully moved. It shows you where you still identify with the old self. And instead of fighting it, you use it, you observe it, and you return to the state again and again until the new identity becomes stronger than the old memory. Because identity, once stabilized, overrides everything. Circumstances, opinions, time, logic, all of it bends to identity. That is the power of imagination. Not as fantasy, but as self-definition. So now the question becomes sharper. Who are you when you stop looking at your life? Who are you when you close your eyes? Who are you when no evidence is present? Because that version of you is the one creating everything, not the one reacting, the one assuming. And if you truly understand this, you stop waiting, you stop checking, you stop asking, when will it happen? Because you know it already has. Within, and what is done within must appear without. That is law, not hope, not theory, law. So you remain calm, certain, not because you see it, but because you are it. And that changes everything. There comes a moment when you realize the problem was never time. It was not delay. It was not conditions. It was not other people. It was this. You were still waiting to become what you could already assume. And waiting is a state, a very subtle one. It looks harmless. It even feels reasonable. But underneath it, There is a quiet belief, it is not mine yet. And that one assumption keeps everything just out of reach, because you cannot experience what you believe is still coming. You can only experience what you accept as present. This is why the shift is not from lack to having. It is from waiting to being. And that shift happens instantly, not gradually, not over time, in a decision. The moment you stop asking, when will it happen, and start declaring it is done, something inside you stabilizes, not emotionally dramatic, not explosive, quiet, certain, like something has clicked into place. And from that point on, you are no longer chasing the result. You are expressing it. This is what most people miss. They think manifestation is about getting something. It is not. It is about becoming someone. Because the moment you become it, the world has no choice but to reflect it. Not because the world is trying to please you, but because it has no independent identity. It mirrors always, faithfully, and sometimes painfully. Because it reflects not what you want, but what you are. So if there is still delay, it is not punishment. It is feedback. It is showing you you are still somewhere else. And that awareness is not failure. It is direction. It tells you exactly where to return. Back to the end. Back to the state. Back to the identity. This is why thinking from the end is everything. Because the end is not a future event. It is a present identity. You are either the one who has it or the one who doesn't. The one who is chosen or the one who is waiting. The one who is secure or the one who is hoping. And your inner conversations reveal which one you are. Listen closely to them, because they are not random. They are rehearsals of identity. Do you hear yourself explaining why it hasn't happened? Do you hear yourself preparing for disappointment? Do you hear yourself justifying delay? Or do you hear certainty? Do you hear calm knowing? Do you hear quiet completion? Because that inner voice is not just commentary. It is creation. You are speaking your state into form, not with your mouth, with your identity. This is why Neville emphasized something so simple and so easily ignored. Mental conversations, not affirmations repeated mechanically. Conversations that feel real. Conversations that imply it is already done. Someone congratulates you. Someone thanks you. Someone acknowledges the change in you. And you respond naturally, not forcing it, not acting, just be. And in that moment, you are no longer imagining something separate. You are experiencing a different self. That is the key. Because imagination is not about seeing pictures. It is about entering experience, feeling it, living it, letting it surround you internally until it feels like the most normal thing in the world. And once it feels normal, it begins to appear. Because the world cannot continue to reflect a state that you are no longer loyal to. So loyalty becomes everything, not intensity, not perfection, loyalty. Do you return to the state even when nothing has changed yet? Do you remain in the identity even when your senses disagree? Do you hold the feeling even when logic questions it? Because that is faith, not blind belief, but faithfulness to a chosen identity. And faithfulness is what gives imagination power. Not because imagination lacks power, but because you must remain in the state long enough for it to harden into fact. This is where many stop right before the shift, because they look and see nothing. They check and see no change. They wait and feel no confirmation. And they conclude it didn't work. But what really happened is this. They left the state. They returned to the old self. And the old self recreated the same reality. So the lesson becomes clear. Do not measure progress by what you see, Measure it by what you are. Are you still the same person inside, or have you actually moved? Because once you move, everything else must follow. Not instantly always, but inevitably. That is the law. And this is where something powerful happens. You begin to detach, not from desire, from urgency. You no longer need it to happen tomorrow, because to you, it already has. And that removes pressure. And pressure is often what distorts the state, because urgency implies lack. Calm implies possession. So the more natural it feels, the closer it is, not in time, in expression. This is also why imagination is called the kingdom, because in that state, everything is subject to you, not through control, through identity. You do not force events. You become the one for whom those events are natural, and life arranges itself accordingly. So now the path becomes simple. Stop waiting. Stop checking. Stop asking when. Choose, assume, remain, and let the unseen become seen, because it will. It always does. There is a point in this journey where everything becomes incredibly simple, and at the same time, incredibly confronting, because you begin to see this clearly. Nothing outside of you has ever been the cause. Not people, not timing, not opportunity, not luck, only states. And if only states create, then every experience, without exception, can be traced back to one thing: who you were being. Not what you intended, not what you wished, not what you hoped, what you identified with. This is where many hesitate, because it removes every illusion of randomness. It reveals a deeper order, an invisible structure behind everything. And in that structure, there are no accidents, only reflections. So instead of asking, why did this happen to me? You begin to ask, what state was I occupying when this formed? And that question changes everything. Because now, you are no longer a victim of events. You are the source of them. Not consciously at first, but continuously. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. You start noticing patterns, repeating emotions, recurring situations, familiar outcomes. And you realize they are not repeating because life is unfair. They are repeating because identity has not changed. The same inner state must produce the same outer world. That is law. So if you want a different life, you do not fight the world. You change the state. And that change is not external. It is internal and immediate. You select a new version of yourself, and you become loyal to it. This is where the idea of selling everything becomes real. Because now you understand you are not giving up things. You are giving up old identities. The one who feels rejected, the one who feels behind, the one who feels uncertain, the one who feels limited, all of these must be released. Not suppressed, not fixed, abandoned. Because you cannot be two selves at once. You cannot be secure and still feel unworthy. You cannot be chosen and still expect rejection. You cannot be abundant and still think in lack. One must go, and the one that goes is the one you stop feeding. Because identity survives through attention. What you return to lives. What you ignore fades. So the process becomes withdraw attention from the old self, give attention to the new one, again and again, until the new becomes natural. This is not pretending, this is reselection. You are choosing a different version of yourself to occupy. And once occupied, it becomes real. This is why imagination is not escape. It is entrance. You are not leaving reality. You are entering a deeper level of it. The level where everything begins. So when you imagine, you are not making something up. You are selecting a state that already exists, because all states exist. Success exists, wealth exists, love exists, freedom exists, and so do their opposites. You are not creating the state. You are entering it. And the moment you enter it, you begin to think from it, feel from it, see from it. And that is what changes everything. Because perception shifts, opportunities appear differently, people respond differently, situations unfold differently. Not because the world changed first, because you did, and the world followed. This is why the bridge of incidents feels so natural. It does not feel forced. It does not feel magical. It feels logical, even though it began in imagination. Because once the state is accepted, life reorganizes itself to reflect it. And from the outside, it looks like coincidence. But from within, you know. You know it started the moment you assumed it. This is also why time becomes irrelevant. Not because things happen instantly, always, but because time no longer defines truth. Truth is defined by state. If it is true within, it is only a matter of expression. So instead of waiting for time, you deepen the state. You stabilize it. You become it more fully. And as you do, the outer world catches up. This is where patience transforms. It is no longer passive waiting. It is active being. You are not waiting for it to happen. You are allowing it to unfold. And that changes your energy completely. No pressure, no desperation, no urgency, just quiet certainty. And certainty is one of the most powerful states you can occupy, because certainty does not ask, it knows. So now the question becomes even clearer. What are you still holding on to that belongs to your old self? A story, a memory, a label, a fear? Because as long as you keep it, you keep the state alive. And as long as the state is alive, it will continue to express. So the invitation is simple: let it go. Not gradually, not conditionally, completely. And step into the new. Not tomorrow, now. Because the moment you do, you are no longer the same person. And the moment you are no longer the same person, you cannot continue to live the same life. That is impossible. Because life does not respond to effort. It responds to identity. And identity is always chosen. There is one final barrier, and it is more subtle than all the others. It is not doubt. It is not fear. It is not even disbelief. It is this: the need to see proof before you fully surrender. And this need keeps you just outside the state. Because the moment you say, I will believe when I see it, you have reversed the law. You have placed reality as the cause and imagination as the effect. But the truth is the opposite. Imagination is the cause. Reality is the echo. And an echo always comes after the sound, never before. So if you are waiting for evidence, you are waiting for the echo before you make the sound. And that is why nothing moves. This is where faith becomes real, not emotional, not dramatic, but directional. You choose which way you trust, outward or inward. Do you trust what you see? Or do you trust what you have assumed? Because you cannot serve both equally. One must lead and the other must follow. Most people live led by appearances. They look, they react, they adjust. And in doing so, they remain trapped in repetition. Because they are always responding to what already exists, instead of creating what could exist. But the one who understands reverses it. He assumes first. He feels it real. He accepts it as done. And then he lets the world catch up. This is why persistence is not effort. It is refusal to be moved by appearances. You see something, but you do not accept it as final. You feel something, but you do not identify with it. You experience something, but you do not define yourself by it, because you know states change. Reality follows. So instead of reacting, you return again and again to the chosen state. This is discipline, not controlling the world, controlling your loyalty, because loyalty determines identity. And identity determines experience. So the practice becomes simple. You notice the old state. You do not fight it. You do not analyze it. You simply leave it. And you return to the end, to the feeling, to the identity. And you remain there as long as you can. This is why even a few seconds done correctly is more powerful than hours of scattered thinking. Because it is not duration, it is immersion. Did you actually feel it? Did you actually become it? Even briefly? That is enough. Because once you touch the state, you have planted it. Now your only job is not to dig it up. And digging it up looks like this: checking constantly, doubting quietly, replaying the old story, looking for signs. All of that disturbs the state. Not because the state is fragile, but because you are leaving it. So instead, you trust. Not blindly, but based on understanding. You know the law. You applied the law. Now you allow the law. This is where something beautiful happens. You begin to feel relief. Not because it appeared, but because it is done. And that relief is a sign that you have shifted. Because the old self feels pressure. The new self feels completion. So if you still feel tension, you have not fully moved. Return. If you still feel urgency, you have not fully assumed. Return. If you still feel lack, you are still identifying with the old state. Return. Always return. Because every return strengthens the new identity and weakens the old one, until one day, without effort, you realize you no longer think the old way. You no longer feel the old way. You no longer react the old way. And shortly after, life reflects it, not as a miracle, as a mirror. This is also why imagination must be protected. Not in a defensive way, but in a selective way. What you consume matters. What you dwell on matters. What you repeatedly expose yourself to matters. Because all of it becomes material for imagination. And imagination will use whatever you feed it. So if you feed it fear, it will create fear. If you feed it limitation, it will create limitation. If you feed it possibility, it will create possibility. You are always feeding it. The only question is with what? So become intentional, not obsessive, aware. Choose what aligns with your desired state. Ignore what pulls you away. Not because you are avoiding reality, but because you are creating it. And creators are selective. This is the final shift. You stop being influenced and start influencing from within, quietly, consistently, powerfully. And once you reach this point, something else fades. The need for validation. You no longer need others to confirm it. You no longer need signs to reassure you. You no longer need immediate results to believe. Because belief has become identity. And identity does not ask for permission. It simply is. And from that being, everything unfolds. Naturally, inevitably, perfectly. At some point, this stops being a technique and becomes a way of seeing. Not something you do for a few minutes a day, but something you live from. Because you begin to realize there is no neutral moment, no empty state, no pause in creation. You are always imagining, even when you think you are not, even when you are distracted, even when you are reacting. You are still selecting, still assuming, still becoming, and life is still responding. So the real question is no longer, how do I manifest this one thing? The real question becomes, who am I being all day long? Because that is what you are manifesting. Not the few minutes you sit and imagine, but the identity you return to throughout the day. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. You don't need perfect focus. You need repeated return, again and again and again. Every time you notice yourself slipping, you come back. not with force, with awareness. You remember, this is not who I am anymore. And you shift quietly, internally, back to the chosen state. This is mastery, not controlling thoughts, choosing identity. Because thoughts follow identity. Emotions follow identity. Reactions follow identity. So instead of fighting thoughts, you change the one who is thinking them. And everything reorganizes naturally. This is also where imagination becomes effortless, because you are no longer trying to create something new. You are simply being yourself at a higher level. And that feels natural. It feels right. It feels like returning, not reaching. And from that place, you stop forcing imaginal acts. They begin to happen on their own. You catch yourself thinking from the end. You catch yourself expecting differently. You catch yourself feeling differently without trying. And that is the sign. The state is becoming stable. And when a state becomes stable, it becomes dominant. And when it becomes dominant, it becomes your world. This is why small moments matter. The way you respond to delay, the way you interpret silence, the way you react to uncertainty, all of it reveals your state. Do you return to doubt, or do you remain in knowing? Do you fall back into fear, or do you stay in identity? Because these moments are not interruptions, they are confirmations. They show you where you really are, and instead of judging them, you use them as reminders to return again and again until returning becomes unnecessary because you no longer leave. This is where something profound happens. You stop feeling like you are waiting for life, and you start feeling like life is moving through you. Decisions become clearer. Opportunities feel aligned. Interactions feel different. Not because the world changed suddenly, but because your relationship to it did. You are no longer reacting. You are projecting from within. And projection is what shapes experience. This is also why others begin to respond differently. Not because you told them to, but because they are meeting a different version of you. And that version invites a different response. Respect appears. Recognition appears. Opportunities appear. Because the state you occupy is now visible. Not as imagination, as personality, as presence, as reality. And yet, it all began in silence. In a moment no one saw. In a decision no one heard. In an assumption no one confirmed. That is the power. Invisible until it isn't. This is why you no longer need to convince anyone. You no longer need to explain. You no longer need to prove. Because proof is inevitable. Not immediate always, but certain. And certainty removes the need to argue. So you move quietly, internally stable, externally flexible, allowing life to unfold while remaining rooted in identity. And this is where trust becomes effortless. Not because nothing goes wrong, but because nothing shakes you. You understand? Everything is part of the bridge. Even delays, even detours, even unexpected turns. They are not interruptions. They are arrangements, leading you from assumption to expression. So instead of resisting them, you allow them without losing your state. Because your state is the destination. And the destination is already within you. So you remain calm, certain, unmoved, not waiting, not chasing, not forcing, just being. And from that being, everything continues to unfold exactly as it must. And now, everything comes down to this. Not theory, not philosophy, not even understanding. Decision, because you can hear all of this, you can agree with all of this. You can even feel inspired by all of this. And still return to the same self. Nothing changes until you choose. Not once emotionally, but once deeply. You decide, this is who I am now. Not I will become, not I'm trying to be, not I hope to be. I am. And you accept it without permission from the world. That is the moment everything shifts. Because from that moment, you are no longer experimenting. You are living from it. And living from it means this: you think from it, you feel from it, you respond from it, you return to it no matter what. That is faith. Not belief that something might happen, but loyalty to what you have already accepted as true, even when there is no evidence, even when nothing has changed yet, even when the world looks exactly the same, because you understand something now that most people never truly accept. Reality does not lead, it follows. And if it follows, then your only responsibility is to lead correctly from within. This is why the teaching is both simple and absolute. There is no middle ground. You are either living from the state or reacting to the world, trusting imagination or trusting appearances, being the new self or remembering the old one. There is no neutral position, because every moment you are choosing, and every choice is forming identity. And identity is forming reality. So now you stand at a point of power, not because something external has changed, but because you see clearly, you understand the law, you have felt the shift, you know what to do. So the only question left is, will you do it? Will you actually assume it and remain there? Will you stop checking and start being? Will you release every backup belief and trust completely? Because this is the price. Not money, not effort, not struggle. Total inner commitment. Selling everything else. Every other cause. Every other explanation. Every other power. And choosing one, your own wonderful human imagination. That is the pearl. And once you truly choose it, you cannot go back. Because you will begin to see results. Not once, not by accident, but consistently, quietly, naturally. And those results will remove doubt permanently. Because experience is the final confirmation. So start now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when conditions improve. Now. Close your eyes tonight and become. Not think about, not wish for, become. The version of you who already has it. Feel it. Rest in it. Sleep in it. And when you wake, do not check the world. Return to the state again and again until it feels like you. Because once it feels like you, it is only a matter of time before the world reflects it. Not because you forced it, because you are it. And that is the secret. Not hidden, not complicated, just really accepted fully. Now you know. Now you choose. And from this point on, everything that follows will reflect that choice.